They thought they picked the perfect target, a quiet suburban home, a woman alone at the door, and fake police uniforms to scare her into silence. But when these so-called HOA cops shoved her and threw a punch, they didn't realize who was watching. Behind her stood her husband, not just any man, but a battle-hardened Navy SEAL. In one instant, the calm, smiling neighbor vanished, and the warrior awoke. What happened on that driveway left an entire neighborhood speechless, and those impostors unconscious. The street was calm that afternoon, the kind of quiet every homeowner hopes for. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a few houses down, sprinklers hissed across trimmed lawns, and the smell of barbecue drifted from somewhere in the distance. Inside one modest suburban home, a couple sat at the kitchen table. They weren't rich, but their laughter filled the room with a wealth money couldn't buy. The wife had just poured herself another cup of tea when she noticed movement through the front window. 3 men in dark uniforms marched up their driveway. Their boots struck the pavement with deliberate heaviness, and though their badges caught the sunlight, something about them felt wrong. The way they carried themselves, too aggressive, too staged. They knocked sharply, not like neighbors, not like officials, but like intruders trying to mask authority. HOA enforcement, one barked. "Open the door now." The wife frowned, unease curling in her stomach. She opened the door halfway, cautious. "Can I see some proper identification?" she asked. Her voice held firmness, but her pulse raced. The men exchanged smirks. "Lady, don't play games," one sneered. "Do as you're told, or else." The moment his wife's voice carried a sharp edge, he knew something wasn't right. From the living room, he could see the 3 men standing at the doorway. Their uniforms were dark, but not crisp. Their badges flashed, but the details didn't look official. Years of training had taught him to notice the smallest details, the things others would overlook. And every detail screamed wrong. He rose slowly, calm, measured, but his eyes locked onto the strangers. They stood with too much arrogance, their posture more like street bullies than law enforcement. One had his hands resting on his belt, fingers twitching like he was ready for a fight. Another's badge hung crooked, not pinned with care but slapped on like a costume. The third, the loudest, had a smirk plastered across his face, the kind that dared someone to resist. "Ma'am," the loud one barked again, "we're here on HOA business. You violated community codes. We can fine you, or we can haul you down right now. Up to you." The wife stiffened, her hand tightening on the doorframe. Behind her, she felt her husband's steady presence. He didn't raise his voice, didn't step in yet, but the weight of his silence filled the space. The men didn't notice it, but she did. She could feel it in the way his shoulders squared, the way his eyes narrowed, the way his jaw set firm. He wasn't just watching. He was calculating. Studying their movements. Measuring their weaknesses. They thought they were in control, but they had no idea what kind of man they had just challenged. The warrior inside him was already awake. The standoff on the doorstep stretched like a taut wire. The wife's breath quickened as she tried to reason with the men, but their arrogance grew heavier with every second. The loud one leaned in closer, his voice dripping with mock authority. "Enough questions," he snarled. "Step aside, or we'll make you." When she didn't move, his smirk twisted into something darker. With one sudden motion, he shoved her hard against the doorframe. The impact knocked the breath out of her lungs, and before she could regain balance, his fist came across her face. The sound cracked through the quiet street like a gunshot. Gasps erupted from the neighbors hidden behind curtains and phones. Some whispered, some cursed under their breath, but no one stepped forward. Except him. Her husband moved with a calmness that belied the storm raging inside. In 2 strides he was there, catching his wife as she stumbled, his arms steadying her. His eyes lifted to the impostor who had struck her, and in that instant, his composure transformed into something far more dangerous. "Big mistake," he said, his voice low but laced with steel. The thug scoffed and swung again, but the Navy SEAL didn't dodge, he redirected. A sharp twist of the wrist, a snap of leverage, and the attacker was spun off balance. Before the man even realized what had happened, his face met the hood of the fake patrol car with a sickening thud. The neighborhood went silent. One down. The second thug panicked, charging in wild desperation. The seal shifted, sidestepped, and in one fluid motion, flipped him hard onto the gravel. Dust and blood mixed as the man groaned on the ground, stunned. Only one remained standing now, the smirking leader suddenly not so confident. And the Navy SEAL hadn't even broken a sweat. Gravel crunched beneath heavy boots as the fight spilled fully into the driveway. The quiet suburban street, once peaceful, now buzzed with tension. Curtains fluttered, blinds cracked open wider. Cell phones tilted out of windows, shaky hands pressing record. Everyone wanted proof of what they were witnessing. The Navy SEAL stood firm, shoulders squared, his breathing steady. Two men were already down, one sprawled against the hood of the car, the other groaning in the dirt. The third thug, suddenly stripped of his smirk, staggered back. Fear flickered in his eyes, but pride forced him forward. "You're done," the thug spat, charging with fists swinging wildly. The SEAL didn't flinch. He let the man come closer, his body coiled like a spring. At the last second, he shifted aside, grabbed the thug's arm, and twisted. The move was clean, surgical. The man's body lifted off the ground before crashing onto the driveway with a thud that echoed across the neighborhood. Gasps rose from the onlookers. Someone whispered, "He's trained, this guy knows exactly what he's doing." The SEAL stood tall, scanning the three broken impostors around him. His wife, bruised but upright now, clutched her cheek and stared at him with awe and relief. The message was clear, their fake authority had crumbled. The driveway no longer belonged to them. It was his battlefield now. The last man standing was the one who had carried himself with the most arrogance, the self-proclaimed leader of this fake squad. Only minutes ago, his smirk had been unshakable, his tone dripping with false authority. Now, surrounded by his fallen crew, his mask was cracking. He stumbled back a step, hands trembling, badge glinting crookedly in the porch light. Sweat ran down his temple as the Navy SEAL closed in, each step deliberate, heavy, controlled. The air seemed to tighten, every neighbor holding their breath. "Why, you don't know who you're messing with," the man stammered, his bravado thinning. We've got orders. HOA business. Just following rules." The SEAL's eyes narrowed. His voice dropped low, every word cutting through the silence like a blade. "Real cops don't punch women. Real authority doesn't hide behind lies. And you? You're nothing but a thug in a costume." The leader tried to backpedal, but there was nowhere to go. His heel caught the edge of the driveway. The SEAL grabbed him by the front of his fake uniform, yanking him forward. One swift strike to the gut folded the man in half. He collapsed to his knees, gasping, all pretense of control gone. The wife stepped forward then, her cheek still swollen, and tore the plastic badge from his chest. It snapped free in her hand. She held it up for the neighbors to see. "Fake," she said firmly, her voice carrying across the street. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones zoomed in. Gasps turned into outrage. The truth was out, and the leader's smirk was gone forever. The leader knelt on the driveway, clutching his stomach, gasping for breath. His two partners groaned beside him, beaten and broken, their fake uniforms twisted and torn. The neighborhood, once silent, had transformed into a sea of murmurs. More blinds lifted, more phones appeared, the red record buttons glowing in the dusk. The wife, still trembling but standing tall, held the flimsy badge high for everyone to see. She turned it over in her hand, exposing the cheap plastic, the uneven printing. "This isn't real," she said, her voice steady despite the bruise on her cheek. The words rippled like a shockwave. Neighbors whispered to each other. "They're not cops." "HOA? No way." Someone muttered, "That looks like something from a costume shop." The SEAL crouched low, grabbing the leader by the collar and forcing him to look at the circle of phones trained on him. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his tone low and unyielding. The thug tried to hold his silence, but fear betrayed him. His eyes darted nervously toward the large house at the end of the street, the HOA president's home. Gasps erupted. People had suspected the man's arrogance for years, but to see him exposed like this? It was different. The SEAL released the thug, letting him collapse onto the driveway. "You picked the wrong house," he muttered. Now, the mask of authority was shattered, and the truth was no longer theirs to hide. The whole neighborhood had seen it with their own eyes. The night air grew heavy with tension, but beneath it came a new sound, low at first, then building fast. Sirens. Real ones. Red and blue lights flickered faintly against the far end of the street, growing brighter with every passing second. The crowd shifted, phones lifting higher, voices rising in anticipation. Some neighbors whispered, others called out louder, "Finally, the real cops are here." The impostors stiffened. Panic spread across their faces. Their false authority, already crumbling, was about to be obliterated. One of them tried to scramble to his feet, but the Navy SEAL pressed a boot gently on his chest, not enough to injure, just enough to keep him pinned. "Stay down," he ordered. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The wife stood beside him now, her hand resting lightly on his arm, both comforted and empowered by his presence. She glanced around at the crowd. "Make sure you keep recording," she told the neighbors. "No more lies. Not tonight." The sirens grew louder until the street lit up with flashing lights. Patrol cars slid to a stop, doors flying open. Real officers poured out, weapons drawn, eyes darting from the beaten men on the ground to the calm, battle-ready figures standing over them. One officer shouted, "What the hell happened here?" The neighbors erupted, voices overlapping, all pointing to the fake badges, the bruised woman, and the man standing tall like a sentinel in his own driveway. For the first time all night, the HOA impostors were utterly silent. They knew the show was over. Flashlights swept across the driveway as the real police moved in, cuffing the fake HOA cops one by one. The groans of the impostors mixed with the hum of radios and the shouts of officers securing the scene. Neighbors crowded closer now, no longer afraid but emboldened, their voices rising in outrage. "They punched her," one shouted. "They broke into his property," another added. "Check their badges, those things are fake." The wife handed the flimsy plastic badge to an officer, who studied it under the beam of his flashlight. His jaw tightened. Cheap knockoff. Not regulation. Not even close. The SEAL stood back, arms folded, calm but watchful. His role was finished. He didn't gloat, didn't boast. He just stayed by his wife's side, steady as a wall, while justice began its course. An officer approached the groaning leader. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The man hesitated, but his eyes betrayed him, flicking once more toward the HOA president's house at the end of the street. Gasps spread through the crowd. The rumor was now evidence. The neighborhood had seen the truth, and this time, no amount of power or money could bury it. The crowd's attention shifted as every pair of eyes turned toward the mansion at the end of the street. Curtains twitched, and a shadow moved behind the glass. The HOA president, usually smug and untouchable, now looked cornered in his own fortress. Two officers marched straight toward his front door. Their radios crackled, neighbors' phones zoomed in, and the whispers grew louder. "He sent them. We all knew it. Now he's finished." When the door opened, the president appeared in his silk robe, trying to look composed. But his confidence faltered as the police stepped inside without invitation. One officer held up the fake badge recovered from the impostors. "We need answers." "No." The president's attempt at a smile failed. He muttered excuses, claiming he had nothing to do with those men, but the evidence told a different story. One of the impostors, desperate for leniency, cracked under pressure and shouted, "He paid us." He wanted them intimidated, said scare tactics would keep the neighborhood in line. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Phones caught every word. The president's face drained of color. He tried to retreat inside, but the officers moved fast, gripping his arm and pulling him into the flood of flashing lights. The same neighbors he once bullied now recorded his disgrace. His power had vanished in an instant. For the first time, the street belonged to the people, not the president. The HOA president was shoved into the back of a squad car, his silk robe catching on the doorframe as the crowd erupted in cheers. For years, he had ruled the neighborhood with intimidation and petty power plays. Tonight, his empire crumbled under the glow of porch lights and the unblinking eyes of phone cameras. The wife stood at the center of it all, her bruise visible but her spirit unbroken. Neighbors gathered around her, offering words of comfort, some even apologizing for staying silent too long. She simply nodded, her hand finding her husband's. The Navy SEAL didn't smile, didn't soak in the applause. He just held her close, his eyes scanning the street as if still guarding his home. To him, this wasn't about revenge or glory, it was about protection. About making sure no one laid a hand on his family again. One officer approached, lowering his voice. "We'll take it from here. You did the right thing." For the first time that night, the SEAL relaxed his shoulders. He looked down at his wife, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "It's over." But to the neighborhood, it was just beginning. Their silence had been broken. Their fear dismantled. The message was clear, this street would never bow to bullies again. In the days that followed, the street transformed. What had once been a quiet, fearful neighborhood now hummed with conversations and newfound unity. Neighbors who rarely spoke to one another began sharing coffee on porches, swapping stories, and checking in on each other. The footage of that night spread online like wildfire. Headlines painted the Navy SEAL as a protector, a symbol of strength, while the HOA president became a national embarrassment. Lawsuits, investigations, and resignations followed quickly. His reign of intimidation was over. For the wife, the bruise on her cheek faded, but it became a badge of honor in the eyes of her community. She walked the sidewalks with her head high, no longer just the quiet woman at the end of the block, but a reminder of resilience. Her husband remained the same steady presence, calm, disciplined, almost reluctant in the spotlight. When asked by reporters for a statement, his words were simple. "I'm not a hero. I'm a husband. I protect what's mine." Those words struck deeper than any punch that night. They reminded the neighborhood, and anyone watching, that courage wasn't about picking fights. It was about standing firm when it mattered most. The echoes of that driveway showdown would not fade. They became a story passed from house to house, a legend of the night bullies fell and a family stood unshaken. Weeks later, the neighborhood looked different. Not in its houses or manicured lawns, but in the people. The fear that once lingered had been replaced with trust, a quiet bond forged from the chaos of that night. The HOA was dissolved, the president facing charges that would follow him for years. The fake cops sat in jail, their arrogance gone, their names disgraced. Justice had found its mark. On one cool evening, the SEAL and his wife sat on their porch, watching children ride bikes up and down the street without a care. The neighbors waved more often now. Smiles came easier. It was as though the darkness had been pushed out, replaced by something brighter. The wife leaned against her husband's shoulder. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked softly. He glanced at her, his arm wrapping around her protectively. "Maybe not forever. But if it ever comes back," he paused, his steady gaze sweeping across the peaceful street. "They'll know whose house not to touch." She smiled, her heart safe in the shadow of the man who refused to bow. That night became legend. The story of a family's courage and a neighborhood's rebirth.